jukebox, sister wine.
I'm not bragging or complaining. I'm just stating the fact.
That's what works for you.
I've never stopped. I always keep going.
Freedom, father time.
At 62, country legend Mark Chesnutt is fighting for his life. The same voice that once shook Nashville honky-tonks now trembles under the weight of surgeries, exhaustion, and years of pain. Fans across America were heartbroken when the news broke. Chesnutt, the man behind Too Cold at Home and Almost Goodbye, was rushed to the hospital after collapsing backstage. For 3 decades, he stood as one of the last pure country outlaws, the man who refused to trade steel guitars for pop choruses. But behind that stubborn smile, something darker was eating away. A lifetime on the road, a battle with alcohol, and a body pushed past its limits had left scars deeper than any critic could see. In 2024, he survived an emergency quadruple bypass surgery, a miracle, they said. A year later, at 62, he was back on the road, chasing the same stage lights that once made him a star. Until October 2025, when the sirens came again. His blood pressure spiked, his heart gave out, and once more, he was forced to cancel every show. The crowds went silent. The neon lights dimmed, and for the first time, even Mark Chesnutt wondered if the music might be over. Everyone thought he was just tired, but the truth behind what broke him is much darker.
Long before the headlines and hospital lights, Mark Chesnutt was just a shy boy growing up in Beaumont, Texas, a place where oil rigs cut across the horizon and country music poured out of every bar. His childhood smelled of sawdust floors, jukebox smoke, and long Sunday afternoons spent listening to George Jones on a scratchy old record player. His father, Bob Chesnutt, wasn't just a fan. He was a singer, too, a honky-tonk performer who played in smoky bars and small-town dance halls. Bob taught young Mark 3 chords on the guitar and one unshakable truth. Son, country music ain't about fame, it's about pain. Mark took that lesson to heart. He was only 15 when he started sneaking into bars to sing alongside his dad. He didn't have the polish or the confidence yet, but he had something stronger. A voice that sounded older than he was, soaked in heartbreak and dust. Locals started calling him the kid with the George Jones soul. School never held his attention. He dropped out before graduation, trading classrooms for dive bars. By 17, he was playing 5 nights a week. Beer-stained floors, half-lit neon, $50 a night. He learned to read a crowd before he learned to read contracts. It wasn't an easy road. Money was tight. His old pickup broke down so often he slept in it between gigs. He sang through sore throats, cough syrup his only medicine. But he kept going, because singing wasn't just what he did, it was who he was. And for every empty crowd and smoky bar, there was one moment that told him he was meant for more. A record producer visiting Beaumont in the mid-'80s caught one of his sets. The man offered him a shot to record in Nashville. Mark hesitated. He wasn't sure he belonged there. Nashville was slick, shiny, and full of rules. He was rough, real, and stubborn as Texas mud. But destiny doesn't ask for permission. That one performance, that one raw, whiskey-soaked voice would soon rewrite the country charts. Mark didn't know it yet, but the sound he carried from those Texas bars, that heartbreak, that grit, was about to echo far beyond Beaumont.
By the late 1980s, Mark Chesnutt had something Nashville couldn't ignore anymore, a voice that sounded like home. He wasn't chasing trends. He was reviving a sound people had forgotten. The pure, honky-tonk heart of country music. His first break came with the album Too Cold at Home in 1990, a record that hit like a thunderstorm over the polished pop of the time. The title track wasn't just a song, it was a statement. It told the world that country music still belonged to the dive bars, the heartbreakers, and the dreamers who couldn't afford a second chance. Suddenly, everything changed. He went from playing smoky bars in Beaumont to sold-out arenas across America. His second single, Brother Jukebox, shot straight to #1. So did Your Love is a Miracle, I'll Think of Something, and Almost Goodbye. Radio called him the new George Jones. Fans called him the real deal. Mark didn't dress like a star. He wore the same boots he'd worn on Texas stages, carried the same worn guitar, and sang like every note might be his last. But success came fast. Too fast. He hated photo shoots. He hated lip-syncing for TV. He said, "I'm not an entertainer, I'm a country singer." In 1993, he reached the peak. His album Almost Goodbye went platinum, and he won the ACM Award for Top New Male Vocalist. But with fame came pressure. His label wanted crossover hits. They wanted pop country radio appeal. Mark refused. He told them, "I won't sing something I don't believe." That defiance made him a hero to traditionalists, but a problem for executives. While other artists embraced the new, Mark held his ground in the old. And when the sound of country started to shift in the late 1990s toward pop hooks and polished production, Mark was left behind. By 1999, his record sales dropped, but to the people who mattered most, the blue-collar fans, the truck drivers, the barroom dancers, he never faded. His concerts were still raw, sweaty, alive. In those late-night shows, you could still see that boy from Beaumont singing because he had to, not because he wanted to be famous. But behind the applause, he was breaking down. Endless touring, long nights, cheap motels, and whiskey for comfort, the lifestyle that built him was now eating him alive. He started showing up late for gigs. His voice cracked more often. He brushed it off as exhaustion, but the truth was simpler and darker. His body was starting to give out. Still, he kept singing. Because for Mark Chesnutt, the stage was both his salvation and his curse. The more he hurt, the harder he sang. And in the glow of neon, with a band that could barely keep up, he would close every show with the same line. Half prayer, half warning. Y'all take care of yourselves. These songs come from real pain. At the time, no one knew how real that pain would become.
Fame has a cruel sense of timing. Just when Mark Chesnutt finally seemed untouchable, the cracks began to show. Years of late nights, cheap whiskey, and endless miles on the road had caught up with him. His body ached. His voice, once effortless, now rasped after every show. He brushed it off. "Just tired," he told interviewers. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. By the early 2000s, the music industry had changed. Nashville no longer wanted songs about pain, heartbreak, or the working man. The era of rhinestones and pop country was taking over. Mark's sound, raw, soulful, honest, was fading from radio. He tried to adapt, but it never felt right. The business that once celebrated him now called him old school. Record labels pulled back, tours got smaller, the money dried up. And that's when the real darkness set in. He started drinking more, not for celebration, but for survival. He drank to numb the fear of fading away, to silence the anxiety that came every time a show sold fewer tickets than the last. Friends say he became distant, quiet. On stage, he was still the same Mark, all swagger and soul, but offstage, he was slipping away. The years of excess finally caught him. First came the back problems. Long drives, hard chairs, endless travel. Doctors warned him to rest. He didn't. He couldn't. The stage was the only place he still felt alive. Then came the heart issues. In June 2024, his chest pain became unbearable. He was rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery, a quadruple bypass. For fans, it was shocking. For Mark, it was the first real sign of mortality. The man who once sang, "It's a little too late," was now living those words. But true to form, he refused to quit. Barely a year after surgery, he announced his comeback, a 2025 tour that was meant to remind everyone who he was. The first shows were triumphant. The crowd cried when he stepped on stage again, voice trembling, scars still fresh. For a moment, it felt like redemption. Then came October 2025. Backstage at a show in Baton Rouge, Mark collapsed. Paramedics rushed him out as the lights dimmed. His blood pressure had spiked dangerously high. He was placed under observation. The remaining shows were canceled. Fans flooded social media with prayers. Some said it was exhaustion, others feared the worst. But those who knew him best, his bandmates, his crew, said quietly, "He's been pushing too hard." Behind the headlines and hashtags was a simple truth. Mark Chesnutt had given his heart to country music, and country music had taken it. He had sung about heartbreak his whole life. Now, heartbreak was singing him back.
By the fall of 2025, Mark Chesnutt was 62, but he looked much older. His face carried the lines of a man who had lived every lyric he'd ever sung. His voice, though weaker, still had that trembling honesty that made strangers cry in dark bars 30 years ago. But on that night in Baton Rouge, when the sirens wailed and the crowd was sent home, something in Mark finally broke. Doctors called it a medical crisis. Fans called it a tragedy. Mark called it a wake-up call from God. He spent weeks in the hospital, hooked to monitors, his body fighting to recover from what doctors described as hypertensive shock, dangerously high blood pressure triggered by exhaustion and stress. For the first time in his career, he canceled everything. No shows, no appearances, no promises. He told friends, "I've been running my whole life. Maybe it's time to stop." Yet, stopping was the one thing he didn't know how to do. From the day he dropped out of school in Beaumont to the night he first stepped on the Opry stage, Mark Chesnutt had only ever known motion. The next gig, the next song, the next drink to keep the loneliness away. The press released polite statements. Mark Chesnutt is recovering and appreciates everyone's prayers. But behind closed doors, the reality was harder. He had lost weight. His heart was fragile. The doctors warned him another collapse could be fatal. Still, even from the hospital bed, Mark asked about his band. "How are the boys doing?" he said. "They need to keep working." That's who he was, loyal to the people who stood beside him when the lights were bright and when they faded. Weeks later, he returned home to Beaumont. Neighbors said they saw him sitting on the porch at dusk, a glass of sweet tea in hand, humming to himself. Not rehearsing, just remembering. He'd glance at the horizon where the oil rigs blinked red in the dark, the same skyline he'd seen as a kid. Maybe he was thinking about the father who taught him those first 3 chords. Maybe he was thinking about how the road always leads home, whether you want it to or not. In a rare phone interview, his voice was soft but steady. "I'm not done singing," he said, "but maybe I'll do it different now. Maybe it's time to sing just for the love of it. The interviewer asked what scared him most. Mark paused. Then he said, "Not being able to finish the song." That line became a whisper among fans. Not being able to finish the song. It summed up everything about Mark Chesnutt, a man who gave his whole life to music, even when that music nearly killed him. And as he recovered, one truth became clear. This wasn't just a story about a heart attack or a surgery. It was about a man confronting the price of chasing his own legend. For years, Mark sang about heartbreak, the kind that happens between lovers. But the real heartbreak of his life was between himself and the stage. He couldn't let go, and it refused to let him rest. At 62, Mark Chesnutt was still fighting, not just for his health, but for his soul. And for millions of fans who grew up with his voice, that fight became theirs too. Because when the music fades, what's left isn't the applause. It's the silence, and the man who has to face it.
History will remember Mark Chesnutt as one of the last true voices of country music, not because he sold millions of records, but because he meant every word he ever sang. He never chased fame. He never polished his sound for radio. He stayed loyal to the kind of country that bled, stumbled, and prayed its way through heartbreak. From Too Cold at Home to Almost Goodbye, his songs were written for the forgotten. The lonely trucker on the highway, the mother crying in silence, the dreamer who just couldn't catch a break. That's why fans never left him, even when the spotlight did. His story, of a boy from Beaumont who rose, fell, and kept singing, is more than just a music tale. It's a mirror held up to every soul who's ever loved something enough to let it hurt them. He taught us that country music isn't about rhinestones or fame. It's about truth, and truth often hurts. Even now, as he recovers quietly at 62, his struggle reminds us that behind every hit song is a human heartbeat that can only take so much. Mark once said in an old interview, "If I die tomorrow, I hope they remember me as a man who sang it real." He doesn't have to worry, because he did. And maybe that's what being a legend really means. Not living forever, but singing your heart out until there's nothing left to give.